it's always about money, or is it that it's never about money? My guest today is Joe Stephan. He is a financial advisor with a podcast by that name. It's never about money, which I love as a financial advisor, that he leads with this question. He acknowledges that the work that he does is not just about money, but about helping his clients understand what is meaningful to them and how to go about living a meaningful life. I was a guest on Joe's podcast, which was just a really fun experience. I wanted to continue the conversation and have him over here on my show. He is a financial advisor as part of a family firm, which is just super complex. There's so many layers of complexity of understanding what he wants in the business, what his family wants, and navigating the overlap between those two. We just had a great conversation. We talk about goals, we talk about money, we talk about making a meaningful life. I think you're going to enjoy this one, so let's get to it. Welcome to the Meaning Movement podcast. We know you want to build a stress-free life and business that gives you the financial freedom and lifestyle that you want. In order to do that, you have to eliminate the conflict between your work and the rest of your life. But the problem is, running a business is hard and requires sacrifice and commitment, leaving you feeling depleted, exhausted, and even burned out. But we believe that every entrepreneur deserves to recapture the motivation and energy they need to run their business. And that is what this show is all about. I'm your host, Dan Cumberland. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button wherever you are listening, and let's go. Joe, welcome to the show. So excited to have you on the Meaning Movement podcast. Welcome aboard.
Thanks, Dan. I'm really fortunate. Actually, round two, ding ding. You've come on my podcast, so I'm really happy to be on.
Yes, absolutely, and I'll make sure to link up to that conversation in the show notes. It was such a fun show, which I know we're going to talk more about because it's just the topic, the title, all of it. Is just so relevant to our community. But let's just, by way to get us started, how do you begin to talk about what you do?
I bumble and I try to summarize it in the best way that I can, Dan. But I think ultimately, after a long time of thinking about what I do as and again, I think the word financial planner doesn't quite summarize exactly what I do because it's evolved over time, but I think it's just allowing families and individuals the opportunity to explore what's meaningful and enjoyable in their life without having to worry about the anxiety of money and the decision making around money and being the leader of a family when it comes to the financial decision making. I think ultimately what makes me tick and makes me feel like I'm contributing is the peace of mind that individuals have after they've been through our program and working with us on an ongoing basis, that they can just simply, and it's not probably simple, but they can actually sit there and think about what are the things that actually makes a life well led for me individually and for my family.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. And your podcast, It's Never About Money is the title, which is such a, I don't know, provocative name for a podcast run by a financial planner, right? Like, because you would think you would be the opposite. It's always about money.
Yeah.
And so when did and it is so perfect. It is a perfect name because of everything that you just said. That money is the start of the conversation, but it takes you to so many other important places. And I'm curious, just even that name, when did that name emerge? How did you come up with that?
Oh, it's been evolving. It's been evolving over years and years and years of having conversations with people, and my general nature is to observe what others are doing and ask questions and be curious. And over time, I've determined that I know it's not never about money, but it's certainly money itself is not the main aim and goal in a successful and happy life. From what I've seen, that's only my observation, and it might be subjective, but I think it to be true. And after having so many conversations on my podcast, And also just having conversations with my clients over time, I think it is absolutely true. It creates a very a binary focus, focusing on money only, and it can create some really unhappy consequences if one just follows that the pursuit of money in and of itself. So it evolved over time. I think, the lockdowns gave me a lot of thinking music about a number of different things in my life. And the podcast, and It's Never About Money, was formulated from a very challenging time.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And the challenging time being the pandemic and like in that space, or is there more to it, to the
Well, I
story that
mean,
we'll get into?
well,
Yeah.
yeah. There's
Yeah.
it's a large part of the pandemic, which obviously forced or a lot of individuals to be thinking and reflecting and staying still and not distracting themselves with other things, and
Yeah.
thinking about what is the purpose and what is the meaning of my next phase in my life. And
Mm.
I'd also gone through a divorce as well, and that was a challenging period. And I think the lockdowns helped me to stay in one spot and really reflect. And
Wow.
one of
Wow.
my reflections was, what's my career look like, and how am I going to contribute, and
Yes.
what have I learned that I can help others with? And the podcast comes out of that.
Wow. Man, I mean, that just sounds just intense. Very
Yeah,
intense.
it was
I mean,
super
I
intense,
just
Dan.
it
Yeah, it
just
was
feels
super.
like a one-two punch. And
Yeah,
so yeah, I feel that.
yeah,
Um, yeah, at a deep level. So just to rewind, let's just hear I want to hear some of your story of like how did you get into financial planning, and
yeah.
what has that
Sure.
that journey been like? So then we'll connect to more of where we are here today.
I think it all fits, Dan. I think it fits. I've got somewhat of a narrative in my mind about the way it works, but I'm not sure
Yeah.
if that matches with reality. But basically, it's financial planning in the blood. My father was a financial planning academic, an accountant. He wore a number of hats. Taught at university, but also had a private practice of a very small group of clients. While I was going through university, myself and my brother, we were around a dinner table talking about financial planning, so we always kind of knew about it. I never felt that I was particularly. I knew what I wanted to do coming out of uni, and so my father sort of suggested to me that this financial planning thing would be. It's a new space. It's something that's helping others, and he thought that I would do a good job in it. And I thought, well, okay, that's good enough for me. So let's go. And
Yeah.
I kind of did. Dad, as well, during that period of time after my university, and doing a little bit of work outside of it in other financial planning firms, and going overseas, and working in a few financial planning firms. He became ill, and I had to come back from overseas at the time to just sort of maybe look after the practice and see clients, and it was a bit of a baptism of fire for me. I really felt like, in some ways, I didn't really have much choice in the matter, in the sense of it being the career for me. I kind of was thrust into this business. Of course, you have a choice. I wanted to help my father out, but that was the main
Yeah.
intention. It wasn't like, is this good for me? Is this going to help me out longer term? I didn't really think about it at the time. It was just kind of a family, um, a family situation that I had to take control of. And
Mm.
so, with time, I became more and more integral in the practice. My brother came in as well and started helping, and I was completely unnerved by the whole scenario in terms of, is financial planning right for me? I'm dealing with retirees. I'm quite young. I was trying to position myself as a very competent young man by being technical, but really, I perhaps didn't have the life experiences necessary to be an amazing advisor, and that takes time. Um,
Yeah.
so
Mm.
yeah, that was the starting point. And again, talking about meaning, I had really no idea about what the meaning was, other than this is a practice that my family operates, and that has some meaning associated with it. But is it
Yes.
ideal for me?
Yes. And that is such a rich question, and one that's familiar. And I think whether it's a family business, literally, or even just family expectations, it's something that a lot of us have to wade through. Of like, where is my voice, and where do my desires fit in the landscape that I'm in, with the other desires and the other voices that have preferences about how I spend my time, and what I choose, and um, to do, and not to do. It feels like you've come to a place where you've found, maybe you had some questions, but have found some peace. That you're in it for well, maybe I should ask you, are you in it for the long haul, or are there open questions still?
No, I'm in it for the long haul under certain conditions, and without those conditions being met, I think the long haul would be unachievable. Um,
Yeah.
I think a lot of the meaning that I've reflected on is in the service to others in conjunction with my brother.
Mm,
It's incredibly meaningful to work with family when it is constructive and it is communicative and it's collaborative and it's all of those things.
yeah.
And it is for us. And the
Yeah.
meaning is clear and obvious when we share the failures together and we share the wins together. And
Mm,
over a period of time taking substandard salaries because you can see the future, and keeping money in the business so that you can expand
yeah.
and grow because you're backing yourself in, and making judgment calls on whether you're working in this niche or that niche, and feeling at times that the tumbleweeds are coming through and there's no new clients. Why is that happening? And then all of a sudden, an initiative that you worked on 3 years ago all of a sudden starts to come to
Mm,
fruition and it starts to work,
mm,
and you're high-fiving. All of these things are incredibly meaningful. The pain and the toil and the challenge and the uncertainty is the are the things that are worthwhile. They're
yeah.
worthwhile because you look back at them and you go, I had to tolerate these things to get to this point, and that's what's meaningful.
Mm,
Um, so to some extent, it's that, but there's also other
yeah.
conditions. I am a creative. I am a person that enjoys innovating and brainstorming and being in communications. And so, as part of my role, I had to carve out a role that actually suits my unique talents. And I am privileged and I'm lucky that I have a brother as well that likes things that perhaps I don't as enjoy as much. And so we
Mm,
divide our labor in a very uh, organic way, and
yeah.
it works really nicely for us. Part of
Mm,
the stack of things that I do is creating a podcast. Like, again, like, why did I create the podcast? Well, I was trying to bridge two worlds. I was bridging the world of giving back some of my insights around money and around what I've learned from my clients. I was also looking at the fact that I'm a musician, and I I I love to create through music production software. On my podcast, I've used a bit of my music, which I'll probably change because it's up time for an update and a refresher, and I feel like
I
doing it.
love it.
And I like to engage and communicate with people. So that gives me energy. So all of those things combined, I thought, well, why not
Mm,
put a podcast together? Why not do something
yeah.
like that?
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, I love how it feels like you've taken a situation that, I don't know, you could be pretty grumpy about, like, I didn't totally choose this, you kind of did, kind of didn't, and have found a way to make a space for yourself, while still honoring your family, honoring the responsibilities, and then but also finding a way to do it with your own flair, with your own creative voice, I guess, in the mix, which is just really, um, yeah, really really fun to see.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's about in time in during your working hours trying to incorporate as much elements of you as you possibly
Mm,
can, but then having the after hours work to be entirely you as
yeah,
well. So we
yeah,
talked about on my episode with you, creativity in terms of hobbies and other things.
yep,
If there are individuals that just simply they try as much as they can to get meaning out of their work, and it's really challenging. What about
mm,
hobbies outside of work? Do you have the energy to be able to do that? And
yes.
certainly from my point of view, I try to do both.
Yes, I love it. I love it. And I think it's such a good invitation to think about it in those terms. That work doesn't have to be your only expression, but it is an opportunity to find some self-expression. But really, both can be true, and really likely should be true, unless you're just
Yeah,
really really fortunate to have the perfect work world. Like many of us have to make compromises in order to find the right fit on both sides of things.
yeah, yeah. And I think it's okay as well as just thinking the other day, Dan. I wonder what your thoughts are as well on this, but it's thinking that it's okay sometimes to not entirely be clear on the meaning. Sometimes, like
Hmm.
for me, I find that when I'm concentrating so much and spending so much time on trying to determine what this meaning is, I'm actually not enjoying myself. I'm being super over analytical, and
Yeah.
I'm not enjoying life as much. And as an example, I took up some dance classes, and I'm constantly going, well, what the hell is the meaning of this? Like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
This is crazy, right? Like, what is a 41-year-old man doing? Dancing in this particular. I've never done any dancing. Like, so why
Yes.
am I doing this? And then I realized that I'm thinking too much about the meaning. Actually, when I
Mm,
do the dance, I thoroughly enjoy it and I
yes.
feel alive.
Yes.
And so maybe the meaning is to just stop thinking about the meaning sometimes and just enjoy it.
Just be. Oh, I love that, and I think it really is true. Meaning is, it's a subjective experience that we can't from the outside look at someone else's activity and say that's meaningful or not meaningful because it's an internal experience, and something that's meaningful for one person might not be, for another. And I hear, even in that, like just the invitation to let yourself have fun, and that in and of itself is a meaningful pursuit. I even think of it in terms of, like, I don't know, I think of a 41-year-old taking up dancing as a I don't know, like it's an act of in some ways an act of courage of, like, becoming a new version of yourself at 41, which I think is a pretty
Yeah.
meaningful expression.
Yeah.
So yeah, I respect you in that.
Yeah, and I think the whole, even the narrative, the conversation of like telling yourself, "Well, you're 41, so why are you doing that?" It's like as if
Yeah.
in my mind I've created certain ages at what is appropriate to do certain things,
Yes.
which I think is an
Yes.
absolute load of crap.
Yes.
I think it reminds me of a mate of mine who's a musician, but he owns a music education business, and he just skateboards all the time, and I'm like, why are you skateboarding? Like, I feel like I'll break a leg if I try to do that. He goes,
Yeah.
Joe, it's the inner boy. It's the inner boy.
Yes.
Make that
Oh,
inner
that's so
boy,
good.
nourish that inner boy. And I'm like, you're
Mm,
absolutely
mm,
110% right. When I'm at my
mm,
happiest, I'm doing the things that came innately to me when I was a boy.
mm. I love that. That really, I feel that, at a deep level, and what a important reminder for listeners to think about, like, how are you, nurturing those attributes, those younger parts of yourself,
Yeah.
and yeah, are you making space, for those,
I feel
which
like
yeah,
those moments where you think about when you were a kid, they're just free of rigid constructs. Like, you're just
yeah,
free of these kind of this rigidity of you should be doing this and you must be doing this, and
mm,
it's just like you're doing what feels right for you in the present moment. And so if we can somehow tap back into that and remove the impediments that we've created from community, potentially from our family, um,
yes,
and then our own developed internal narratives, then I
yes.
think I think we're some way to feeling more energized and happy.
Mm, yeah. When it speaks to me also of like how as adults, well, maybe I should just speak for myself. I can tend to be so caught up on the outcome that I don't allow myself to just enjoy the process. I'm just so caught up because like, well, why would you skateboard? Well, I would skateboard because I want to be able to drop into a half pipe or do a kickflip. Like it's got to like have a goal and have an outcome, not just like because it's fun to go fast and it feels good when I turn. Like, like
Yeah.
the process piece. So I hear that a lot, in what you're sharing here. I think I might have shared this with you on your show, and I can't remember if not, but I use this framework of the four P's of
Yeah.
where we find meaning in work, which are the people, the process, the product, and the profit. And I think what we're talking about here, some of that process piece of whether it's you writing music or your friend skateboarding or whatever it might be, those activities, those things that we do that are just fun and fulfilling just for the very sake of doing the action, that's a really meaningful endeavor even in and of itself, even without an specific outcome
And I
attached.
think,
We'll get right back to our conversation, but I wanted to give a quick shout out to our sponsor. This episode in this season of the podcast is brought to you by 923.co, a web and mobile app development team that I have been working directly with for more than a year, building VideoSnap. VideoSnap.io, if you don't know, is the software that I built to repurpose long-form speech-based content, like this podcast, into short-form viral-ready videos. Think TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Reels, etc. If you're making content and you want to be found in the algorithms, you should be using VideoSnap. I've been building directly with 923, and they are a phenomenal team with a strong track record of building high quality apps. They've built more than 50 apps. Those apps have gone on to do more than $1 billion for their clients, which is incredible. I'm also now contributing to their team in a product strategy role, which means if you have a dream that you want to realize with software, not only should you talk to 923 because they are so good at software, but I could help you directly build that with them. Go to 923.co, all spelled out, 9networthree.co, and find out more. Thanks so much. Now back to the show.
and I think Dan, it's a functional piece as well, because in order to do the things that you don't necessarily love doing, I feel there needs to be a balance of things that you do love doing. And
Yeah.
so if you're just always doing things that you just don't like and you don't enjoy, I think the outcome of that is that you're not going to do that stuff very well. And
Yes. Yes.
sometimes in life, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, I know we're in a time frame where it's sort of like just do what you like, and you have to just love what you do all the time. I think that's kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
not
Yeah. Yeah.
not kind of pragmatic. I think there are
Yes.
times where you have to do things that you just don't like, and so in order
Yes.
to have that cushion to be able to do those things, you need to have these nourishing creative moments, these inner boy
Yes.
moments, and make sure that they're embedded regularly into your life program.
Yes, I completely agree. And like you said, otherwise you're not going to do as well. Otherwise you're not going to give it as much effort. Otherwise you're not going to stay with it long
Yeah,
enough. I think that's a big
correct.
part of it too, is like because you're going to burn out. You can only force yourself through the motions so many times before
Yes.
you're just too exhausted to keep going. And so I look at what you're doing with incorporating your creativity into your business, and I think it's brilliant. I think it's such a great example of how someone can go about taking financial planning feels like at an extreme of where a creative would flourish, but you're finding a way to do it. And so thank you for like creating for being such a great example of that for us.
Yeah, it's interesting that, like, when people see financial planners, it's like, what are they looking for? I think, being philosophically aligned with the advisor is super important, because I think
Yeah.
financial advisors are all qualified, and these days, particularly in Australia now, like there's a degree of professionalism across all of them. So you're going to find
Yes.
very competent financial advisors. So
Yes.
differentiating in terms of technical competency is probably not as diverse as like differentiating in terms of, you know, the whether you get along with them ideologically, whether they kind of speak the same language.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm very happy in the space that I'm in now, and I think I just want to tie off on the way all of the various components of my life fit. So the way that I
Yeah.
see the Stephan Independent Advisory practice, which is a private wealth management practice, well, like I said to you at the start, that is really all about being able to give people the opportunity to not worry about money by us putting together great financial strategies for them so that they can just live their lives, right? The
Mm.
It's Never About Money podcast is about talking about the flip side of money, which is like what's a life well led look like, and where do you fall into trouble when you're just constantly in pursuit of money, right? And
Mm.
then the my music, and I created an EP during lockdown, is really a reflection of me putting into practice what I'm saying in the It's Never
Yes.
About Money podcast. So
Yes.
they kind of all tie in nicely as a running narrative about, work hard, but play hard, um, and this is what I'm doing, and this is what I think works. Um, it's all again subjective, and I'm learning as we go. And I tell you, the podcast itself is, and having guests like yourself, Dan, on, and I'm accumulating knowledge at a rate of knots, and I'm loving it. So
Yes, it's so good. It's so good. Yeah, I think it really makes a really fantastic picture of how all those pieces, yeah, how all those pieces play together. I'm curious how you think about, well, like money is such a loaded topic, and so I want to ask you just a couple questions about money to tap into some of your
sure.
financial wisdom. Um, First, I'm curious what your response to this is going to be. But what if I ask you what is money? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Oof. What is money?
Because it's many things, right? We know it's,
I don't think.
but
Well, firstly, I
yeah,
don't think it's good or it's bad. I think it's just a
yeah,
medium of exchange. It's a platform
that's good.
that
Uh-huh.
allows us to the opportunity to make meaning with our lives, or help us put us in a position of making meaning in our lives. So it can be an enabler. So it can
Mm-hmm.
allow us to do things like take days off to be able to pursue this particular opportunity, to look after our families, to put our kids through private schools, or retire early. So it can be an enabler from that point of view. So it can actually
Mm-hmm.
enrich us and help us, but can also be a detractor where it's a noose around our neck. So it can
Yeah.
be, the not understanding the difference between a need and a want, and overspending on a particular lifestyle asset, which ends up meaning that money becomes the only thing that you could focus on so that you can actually survive the mortgage or the debt that you've
Yeah.
actually taken on.
Mm-hmm.
And then that obviously can affect relationships and affect your health and all that sort of stuff. So if
Mm-hmm.
we're intentional about our money, which is
Yeah.
again this platform that is available to us to help us, then it
Mm-hmm.
can be a real positive influence in our life. And
Yeah.
but in many circumstances where we're not intentional about what our life actually needs to look like, and we're just focusing on money only, what's our next decision to get the best performing investment return, like without actually thinking about why am I actually accumulating, then it can be an absolute source of trouble in our life,
Yeah.
because it ends up
Yeah.
meaning we can be unhealthy, we can be
Mm-hmm.
overworked, we believe that, for instance, we can never retire because it's never enough money.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I've answered the question. Um,
It's a beautiful answer to the question
yeah.
because it gets at some of the complexity of what it brings up. That it's, yeah, can be such an amazing tool for good, or the bane of your existence.
Well,
If you manage it poorly.
Well, I can reflect on my dad's situation as well, being an immigrant from Egypt, arriving in Australia, not having a lot of money, coming here with very little,
Yeah.
and working to the bone to make sure that he gave his kids an opportunity that he never did. So money was
Mm,
incredible, and the hard work to accumulate the money was incredible for him. But at some point in time, when um, he worked so hard and he achieved so much, but at the same time, at some point in time, looking after himself maybe wasn't the greatest priority. And
mm,
I reflect on that, and I'm sure when we had conversations, I had conversations with him. At one point in time, he said to me, I said to him, "You must be so proud, Dad, that you've been able to come here with nothing and been able to build what you've been able to build." And he said to me, "Well, yeah, I am. I am, Joe. I'm really proud, but ultimately, it's not the financial stuff that makes me the proudest. I know that when I leave you guys, I'm leaving you guys well educated, not just formally educated, but educated in life. I'm
mm,
so proud of you guys. It's not what I'm gonna. Money's not what I'm gonna take with me. It's
yeah.
it's the knowledge that you guys are in a really good position, that you'll be okay in the
Yeah.
future. It's
Mm,
me contributing in community with my church work. It's
mm,
those things that I really care about fundamentally. And that was pretty profound for me because, you learn things from these sort of traumatizing events where you lose a family member or whatever. And I remember, and I'm sure that's where the It's Never About Money podcast came from, the foundation of it. It's like, what
yeah.
did dad end up doing? Was he working more at the end when he was sick? No, he was doing art class. He was painting. He was drawing. He was doing things that I really didn't see him or experience him doing that during his, more physically healthy years. He wasn't doing these things. He was working himself to the bone. But
Mm,
as many people do, all of a sudden, they gravitate to these things that they did
mm,
when they were a kid. And it's like,
yeah.
okay, interesting. And I observed that with laser sharp focus at that particular point in time in my life.
Yeah. Oh, that is such just a powerful, powerful story. And thank you for sharing that. It hits me hard, but just, hearing you just retell your dad's legacy, that his legacy is you, like that. So it's really, really beautiful. Yeah. So thank you for that. I'm curious how, like, with that in mind, and with the way you see people towards the end of their lives and retirement, kind of picking up these things, like what else
Yeah.
is on. And I see how you're incorporating that, right? Like you're not waiting till the end to do music. What else? Like, are there other things? Well, and you mentioned dancing, but I'm curious, just like, since you have exposure to people making choices towards, in retirement and things like that, and how that, I'm just curious how that shapes the way you think about what you're doing right now, what you're doing today, what you're doing in the next 90 days, or a year, 2 years.
Well, that's a really good question. I think I've always been interested in psychology, and um, prior to being in financial planning, I was considering doing a psychology degree, and I just again decided by inertia to do a financial planning degree because that's what my family did, right?
Yeah.
But this interest in psychology continues. Self growth books, reading actual psychological literature. It's interesting that that's the case. And so what I tried to do was think about how I can bridge the gap between the two worlds again, which is something that I constantly thinking about. So there is a course in the States. It's a financial psychology course, and I've been exploring
Mm,
whether or not I go down that route because that can
cool.
actually, yeah, I mean, it can help the practice, help me be a better advisor. And it sort of ticks the box again in terms of, making sure that I'm doing things of meaning and that I'm really, really enjoying. And then when it comes
Mm,
to the idea of retirement, um, I think what will happen inevitably for me is that I won't retire in the sense of just stopping altogether. I will be doing stuff. I know that sometimes retirement can be a bit of a poison chalice. I've seen
mm,
it in others where they just stop altogether. I will shift and I will do other things, perhaps, but I will not stop contributing.
Yeah.
I will stop contributing when I'm no longer able to contribute physically. And even still,
Yes.
then I will try to do something. Just yeah, I think that's really really important. If
Yeah.
you can always find something that you love, if it doesn't even mean that you need to make anything from it financially.
Yes, and so even just to be doing something, just to be giving yourself your time, your agency to a work, and what I hear you saying is not necessarily an income, but just to be accomplishing or to be yeah, applying your effort to something is what I hear you saying in
Yeah,
retirement. That's how
yeah,
you think of it.
and I think I mean, I've reflected on it a fair bit in the sense that I have my lifestyle. I love eating out and stuff like that. Beside that, that's really my only indulgence. All I need is a guitar,
Yeah.
and I'm pretty right. So I'm pretty low maintenance as an advisor. I don't need an incredibly expensive lifestyle to survive. I'm all about experiences, and so I suppose that
Right.
aids me well in my choices going forward. So
Totally.
yeah,
I love it. I love it. No, I think I share that. You know, my wife and I often talk about how we would and of course this might all change, but how we think of retirement or those later years in life that like neither of us can imagine just I guess checking out or just sitting around. But it feels like we just have so much to give, and maybe we'll get to that age and just be like, yeah, I'm tired and I just want to sit around all day. But I kind of doubt it. I kind of feel like we're gonna want to like to be taking art classes and dance classes and building something,
yeah.
creating something with our time.
Invariably, any person that is doing retirement well has meaning built into their retirement, and
Mm,
even if they're not working, so
yeah,
they may have six grandkids. And
yeah,
their meaning is helping their kids with their grandkids,
yeah,
and
yeah,
it may be a little bit more travel, but people aren't
mm,
just sitting and well, the ones that are doing it well aren't just that's it, I've given up.
yes,
And
yes,
retirement is a very stressful event for a lot of individuals because there is a transition phase where you're trying to work out, well, what is it now? What is it?
yes,
What is this about? I knew what I was, and I had a lot of my feeling of self importance and my ego tied to what I was doing previously, and all of a sudden now I'm just Joe. I'm not the Joe, the financial planner.
yes,
Who is Joe now at 65 years of age now? Who is Joe? Like,
yes,
how does this and then how does this
100%.
question come up again? How is it? How
Yep.
is it that I keep coming to these points where I'm asking myself who I am again? And it's so surprising. Like it's a constant evolution. And aren't I so privileged as to be working with people and seeing all of this and what they go through? And and again, this is why the podcast exists. Like I'm hoping
So
that
great.
people are listening. Yeah,
Yes, it's so great, and I love that you frame it in those terms because it is about identity. Work is always about identity, as much as we can try to keep those separate. The author and poet David White has a has a book. The title's "Crossing the Unknown Sea," but the subtitle, which I think says it so well, is "Work as a Pilgrimage of Identity." That our work, our career, our whatever we're applying ourselves to, is always about us finding and rediscovering, like you're saying, like always asking that question again: Who am I now? And who am I now? And I think even especially as business owners and entrepreneurs, but not it doesn't exclude other anyone who's trying to do their career in an intentional way, that your career, your work is always going to be asking you to become the next iteration of yourself, just like
yeah,
you've done with your podcast, with your music, that you're like you're finding the voice of Joe in 2022, which is different than your voice a few years back in your work and in your business. And that is just such a retirement. I feel like there's these moments in life that usually comes up when there's a major life event, maybe a pandemic, maybe a divorce, maybe a retirement, kids leaving the nest, empty nesters, um, people who are, you have a forced transition of some sort, and you ask these questions of like, who am I right now? What do I want? And it's just, I love that you're walking with people through some of those questions. How much does it come up in your conversations with retirees about that meaning piece of how they shape those? I'm so curious how you navigate like conversations about meaning
Huh.
and
I've
money,
got, I've
you
got
know?
I've got a little anecdote. I had a client once, a prospective client that was referred to me. It didn't last too long. What happened was she had been, and she was maybe in her mid to late 60s, and she was coming out of a pretty messy divorce. And
Mm,
I was sitting down with her to try to help her. And, part of our process is to ask pretty pertinent questions around, what does life look like going forward, and those types of things. Now, I'm much more acutely aware now that you have to be a little bit careful and tread carefully around those questions when someone has gone through something, pretty traumatic. But it was interesting that I
yeah.
asked a pretty banal question around what goals might be, and she looked at me and she said, in quite an aggressive tone, and this was a very cordial meeting and it was a very nice meeting up to this point. She said, "What would I know about my goals now going forward? What would I know?
Oof.
Why are you asking me about that?"
Oof.
And I kind of took a deep breath and I sort of said to her, "Look, what I'm trying to do, and maybe I haven't done it in the best way possible, but what I'm trying to do is to understand what you are essentially and what meaning there is for you in your life, so that I can give you the best financial advice possible. Perhaps it's not a great time right now to be going through these things with you. Maybe there's a bit of time for you to have some reflection time for you."
Yeah.
And we just kind of like, went through the rest of it. But I reflected on it afterwards,
Oof.
and I thought, was my performance, was I sensitive enough? Or, and I thought about it
Mm,
afterwards, and I kind of talked to James about it as well. And we kind of came to the point that it's just that some people aren't ready to address these things at the time that you need to work with them.
yep.
And
Yep.
and yeah, and yeah. So to answer your question, uh, part of our process is to uncover and to have conversations with people around what's important to them in retirement, and what does, in 10 years time, can you paint for me a picture on who's around you, and where do you want to be located, and who are you talking
Yes.
to, and what does the world
Yes.
look like, and really getting clear on what their future self is.
Mm,
I talked to a person called Hal Hirschfield on my podcast from UCLA University, and he talks about making sure that we all actually spend time focusing on your future self,
mm,
really understanding who that future self is. Because when you do that, when you do that, the decision making you make in the now is in has some clarity, and has the decision making that you put forward now actually helps that future self, because you can connect with that person. So I know what
yes.
50-year-old Joe is doing, or I have a feeling about 50-year-old Joe because I think about 50-year-old Joe quite a bit.
Yes.
And that
Yes.
informs my decision making now. So that's
Mm,
why we ask the questions that we do with our clients, because that
so
helps
true.
them motivate them to make the decisions with us around their finances, because they know and they have some clarity around their 10-year outlook.
I love it. And what a powerful story. And those are the moments, that I'm talking about. These moments that where our identity is like at that transition point of like where that woman and other people have been through similar experiences. Like, well, my current reality, I don't even understand my current reality because it's so far from the plan that I had for myself, right? Like that's
Yeah,
in some ways what she was saying. Like, I can't talk about goals. This wasn't my goal, and so how can I even think about what comes next? Which is hard. It's really heartbreaking.
it
And
is heartbreaking.
I
Yeah.
hope she found what she needed, to process that experience to be able to then imagine a better future,
Yeah, absolutely. And it certainly wasn't my question around goals at the time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that you're doing right by your clients by, inviting them into that, inviting
Yeah,
them to think in those terms. And I love how you frame it in thinking about your future self and having a relationship with your future self, because then it makes things like saving and like sacrificing the
correct.
present in order for the future, like it makes it so much more meaningful instead of it's like,
Exactly.
well, I just want to go on a big vacation or, do whatever or buy a new car. But like, but why not right now? And it's because it's a gift to your future to
You don't
not
think?
do that, to not have those expenses.
I mean, I can see the benefit of those that actually don't look at the future at all and are always living in the present moment. But I don't know,
Totally.
I can see that. I understand that. But I've
Yeah.
always felt that as
Yeah.
a bit lopsided. Like, um,
Yeah.
to connect with your future self in
Mhm.
that way, like, why do I make any decision? Like, I want to be able to make a decision in the now to help myself in the future. If I don't know who I am in the future, then I'm not going to make any decisions in the now that advantages that unknown person. So
Yes. I love it. I
that's
love
what we
it.
try to do as much as possible.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's so in line with the work that I do, both with people around their careers as well as entrepreneurs and business owners around the decisions we're making, to invite them to think about their future, the future of and their direction, and creatively think in terms of what are the stories that they want to be telling in years from now, and then how do we work backwards from there to think about how we're living in the present moment. And so I just love that you're doing that with people on the financial side. It just sounds like you're doing good work, Joe. I really, it's just, yeah, just really resonates with me. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah. Well, this has been just so fun. I feel like we could go on indefinitely, but we'll just have to put a pin in it for future
Yeah,
conversations.
yeah.
But for folks that want to follow along with your work and connect with you, is there anything in particular you'd like to invite people to?
Well, I mean, yes, the "It's Never About Money" podcast is I suppose, the mouthpiece for me in the business, and so they can go to www.itsneveraboutmoney.com .au. They also, on the Stephan Independent Advisory site, www.siadvisory.com.au. There's for any business owners out there, there's a 3-part video series helping people think about their succession, about their financial planning. Yeah, and you can just follow me on LinkedIn as well. So I'm out and about trying to make as much informed noise as possible, like all of us, Dan.
Love it. Yep, out there causing a ruckus. I'm right there with you. I'll make sure to link up to all of those in the show notes, and I appreciate. And I say that in the best way possible, causing the good kind of ruckus that we need you to be making. So thanks
Yeah,
for making
absolutely.
that noise.
Yeah, no,
So,
thanks. And thanks,
yeah,
Dan. I just want to really thank you for having me on. It's been a delight. And thanks for coming on to my episode, on my podcast as well. It's been really nice to connect. It's amazing how both our worlds actually align
yeah,
very nicely. So
totally agree. Yeah, couldn't be happier myself. So thank you.
thanks.